Okay, before we get started on the class, just wanted to say something. So, some of you are not doing so well in the course. Some of you are doing great, but some of you are doing not so great. I just want to let you know, only 35% of the course is done as far as the actual marks. So 2 tests are each 15% plus 5% worth of attendance checks. So if you're not doing well, there's a lot of room to boost your grade. So don't despair now. If you're doing well, basically keep doing what you're doing. The other tests should be roughly similar in difficulty. They just will be longer. So test 3 covers 3 chapters instead of 2. By the way, that means there's more time. So if you haven't been doing as well, start studying earlier. Start looking at those key terms, start making notes. And of course, always feel free to ask questions on course questions. Any questions about the tests or what's left in the course? So today is going to be a little bit unusual. The first half an hour or so is going to be spent talking about first the APA assignment. And I'm then going to use that as a springboard to talk a bit about what getting an education in psychology looks like. I wanted to fit this in somewhere, and it seemed like a natural springboard. After I do that, we'll get into the chapter on personality and probably finish all of it. Just as a question, show of hands, how many of you are thinking of being psych majors? How many of you are thinking of going into grad schools, a master's or PhD? So actually, I've got a decent number, maybe 4 or 5. So if you have any questions about that process, feel free to bring them up during that time. But before that, as I say, we'll talk about the APA assignment. So this document here, APA assignment template, that's your best friend, right? This is what you should just download this and edit it to turn it into the APA assignment. So most of your marks come from formatting, and I never understand why people still somehow manage to get it wrong. I mentioned to my other classes this week that so far, the Douglas students are doing not as well as the University of Alberta students on the tests. This is your chance to pull ahead. The class average was typically around 8 out of 10. As far as I'm concerned, it should be 9.5 to 10. Like, there's really no reason for you to get lower than that. So I'll show you what it looks like. So just download it. So this is what it looks like. Now you have a slight advantage to start with because the formatting for the heading has become easier. There's no longer a running head in APA style. I guess, yeah, I should change this to 1200, but whatever. So on here, you should write your name, like actually write your name. Yes, I have had students just leave it as your name. Don't follow the template that closely. And for the title, well, I should say, the way this assignment will work is you'll find one peer-reviewed journal article on Google Scholar, which I'll be showing you how to do that in a second. And you'll be writing a 1-paragraph, up to 2 if you feel really special, summary of that article. So this title should be a shortened version of the title of that article, because sometimes journal article titles are really long. So you'll write, only 2 out of the 10 marks come from the quality of the writing. So don't feel the need to be really picky about it having like brilliant prose or something. As long as it's a faithful summary of the article, that's fine. If it looks not in line with what's in the article, that's a hint that it was ChatGPT. That'll be automatic 0 if I see anything like that. But there's really no reason to cheat in that way. It's just 1 paragraph. In fact, honestly, if you write 2 paragraphs, the only effect it'll have is I'll be in a slightly worse mood because I'm marking 120 of them. So 1 paragraph's fine. Crucially, you have to cite the article at least once in the paragraph. So the way to do that, this is where a lot of you will lose marks. Well, a lot of people at the U of A lost marks, but no, we're going to be the exception. We're going to lose no marks for this, is with the in-text citation. So if it's one author, you do the last name and then the year. So in this case, height, parentheses, 2001, blah, blah, blah. So you can do it like that. You can start the sentence by saying, Simpson, if it's one author, brackets the year, did this, blah, blah, blah. If you want it at the end of the sentence, it's last name, comma, the year, and all of it is in parentheses. So parentheses, Simpson, comma, the year. If it's two, you have to be careful, because if you do it towards the beginning of the sentence, like not before the period, you use the word and, in this case Simpson and Nash, 2004. If it's in the parentheses, you use the and symbol. Okay, so make sure you do that right. If it's three or more authors, then you have last name et al, so et space al period, parentheses, year, or if it's within the parentheses, Kahan et al period, comma, and then the year. So just do it like it's here, except obviously with the names of the people who wrote your article. Any questions on the paragraph or in-text citations? I believe in you all. You can beat them. Okay, this is where the most mistakes are usually made. You have to cite it here. And me forcing you to get this right is a bit of a gift, because if you go on to take more cite classes, it's APA style for the rest of your education. If you nail it now, you don't have to worry about it. You can just use this template and do that for your future classes. So I'll show you how to get this later from Google Scholar, but Google Scholar is not 100% reliable. So I'll walk through what it should look like. So, well, wait, let's just say it should look like this. But so it's last name, and then first initial period, and so on. And that Google Scholar always gets right, as far as I can remember. The title of the article should be lowercase, except for the first word and the first word after a colon. So this is the name of the article that these gentlemen wrote. The thing in italics is the title of the journal. So there are academic journals. I'll say more about this later when I talk about getting an education in psychology. When you're in grad school or you're a professor, unless you're a professor at a college, but if you're a professor at a big place, you're expected to be constantly publishing articles like this in peer-reviewed journals. So these journals get other experts to read your paper, that's peer review, and if it gets through that process, which is a very difficult one, then it gets published in the journal. So this is actually the top journal in social psych, so Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. That should be in italics. This is really picky, but your other profs will be picky, so you might as well learn this. The number that comes first is the volume number, and Google Scholar will give you that. That should be in italics. The number that comes after in parentheses is the issue number, and that should not be italicized. And yes, I will take marks off for that, so just make sure you do that. And then at the end is the page numbers. That is the most common place where Google Scholar makes mistakes. Sometimes it gives weird things here. Like sometimes it'll just give one number. Now, in rare cases, including more recent journals, sometimes it gives like an article number here instead of page numbers. If it does that, just double check with me that it's a peer-reviewed journal. But if you want to just be really sure, if it looks like this, like the output that Google Scholar gives you, it's a peer-reviewed academic journal. If it has like the volume number, issue number, and page numbers, then you can be sure. If it looks weird, double check with me. It might be a book chapter or something, or a non-peer-reviewed journal. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so now, let me just see, is there anything? So I have some stuff here that's just some tips about using Google Scholar. Obviously, you'll delete all this when you submit it. And I'll walk through those tips right now. So you just go and you look up Google Scholar. Some people are, some of your profs will say, oh, you shouldn't use Google Scholar. You should use, Douglas College Library or PsycInfo. And once you put the citation in the paper, they can't tell where you got it. So, and Google Scholar is easier to use. In grad school, my PhD supervisor, my professor, I don't think I'm outing him by saying this, he used Google Scholar throughout his PhD. It doesn't matter. It gets you access to the same articles. There's one exception I'll talk about in a second, but Google Scholar is perfectly fine. So someone give me a topic that they're interested in. Because this paper can be on any topic in psychology. So what's a topic to look up? None of you are interested in anything? What's a psych topic? Doesn't have to be in this course, yep. Teaching, that's a little bit of an edge case. I guess the psychology of teaching. Maybe I shouldn't say, well, I'm not naming the person, but someone in my other class said, I said, like, oh, like, what's a psych topic? And someone said neuroscience. And I said, can you narrow it down? And he said, neuroscience of the brain. And I was like, well, so yeah, educational psychology, okay, that's fine. So let's take this one. So the most important button is this one, Cite. So you click Cite, go down to APA, and look, this has the same format. So there's like there's the journal. Now notice, this is a mistake APA sometimes makes. In my version on the Word doc, the journal title is capitalized, except for ands and ofs. And here it's not capitalized. So if the output here is different from my output, do what my output says. Google Scholar sometimes makes that mistake. But it has the right structure. There's a journal title, volume number, issue number, and page numbers, so this is good. And again, you're using APA. APA stands for, does anyone know what APA stands for? Oh yeah?
American Psychology Association?
Yeah, psychological, but yes. Yeah. So, American Psychological Association. So here is the PDF, so if you click here, you should get access to it. So voila, there's the article. That's a bit of a long one, so you can take that into account. If there's nothing here, if it's like a blank, now in this case it's a book, so you shouldn't be using that, but some of the journal articles will be blank. What I would do is I would use Google Scholar to find the article I wanted. If it was blank, that means it's not publicly available. Typically it will be available on the library. So then, if you're really interested in, say, this article, although again, that one looks like not a journal article, but you could then copy that title and then find it in the library if you want the PDF. But as far as finding the articles to begin with, Google Scholar is really easy. And so you can write this on any topic in psychology. My recommendation is pick something you're interested in. Might as well learn about something that matters to you. Okay, any questions about finding articles? So, the due date is both on the syllabus and here. So, make sure you hand it in on time. So here it's due March 7th at 11:59 p.m. So I'm just going to be strict, just to keep it simple. If it's 12:01, the next day, so 2 minutes late, that's 1 day, and you'll lose marks each day it's late. Just upload early to avoid that. I don't want sad emails. Oh no, Dr. Simpson, I swear my computer crashed at 11:56 and I was going to hand it in on time. Just hand it in early. This shouldn't take all that long, actually. So upload early to avoid. Makes it easier for everyone. Okay, makes sense? All right, good luck. Hopefully I've motivated you to beat the U of A. I'm just gonna give myself a point. Because the other class, I feel like I may have changed the due date, but okay. So, as I say, I'm going to use this as a springboard to talk about what getting an education in psychology looks like. So for some of you, this may be good information to have. So as many of you probably know, probably most of you, the first step is getting a bachelor's degree. Here at Douglas, we do have a full bachelor's degree in psychology. This is where I did my BA. We only have, I think, 10 or 12 BAs at Douglas College, but psychology is one of them. So if you do it in the standard amount of time, it should take 4 years. Nowadays, this increasingly takes longer for people, but that's how long it's supposed to take. Like if you're doing 10 courses a year. And here, the goal is to just learn lots of stuff, right? You'll have to take the boring classes like statistics and research methods, a certain number of psych classes in various areas, and then you'll get your bachelor's. If you're planning on going on into graduate school, it is recommended you do an honors degree. So Douglas also has an honors program. The key distinction between grad school and undergrads, like bachelor's degrees, is when you're doing undergrad, it's about learning stuff. When you're in grad school, it's about generating new knowledge. It's about doing original research, especially if you're in the experimental psychology route. So social psych, personality psych, cognitive psych, anything like that, it's really about the research. So if you do an honors degree, you'll have to get a certain minimum GPA and then get a supervisor who's willing to work with you. So one of the professors will, if they take an interest in you, they can supervise your honors project, which will be some kind of research project. Typically here, you'll do a Qualtrics survey. So you'll build a survey, maybe an experimental one where you randomly assign people to different conditions, analyze the data, write it up. That'll be your honors thesis, which is a good preparation for what you'll be doing in graduate school. So after that, and you can also do a Bachelor of Science, of course, although we don't offer that here. So after that, you do a master's degree, which typically takes 2 years. And then the last step that you can do is a PhD, which is 3 to 5 years. And in both cases, if you're in that experimental route, your job here will be doing original research. So the culmination of the master's degree is the master's thesis. Culmination of the PhD is the doctoral dissertation, which are supposed to be contributions to an area of research. You can also do TAing, like you can be a TA or an instructor during this time. So that's how I got my teaching experience before I came here, was I taught when I was a PhD student. That's one path, which is the path I know more about. The other path is you can do these degrees in clinical or counseling psychology. And there, you will still do research, especially if you're in the clinical route, but it's more about getting training to be a clinician or a counselor. And if that's the case, during here, you should try to get some kind of real world experience, suicide hotline, working with people with addictions, something psych related like that might be more important than getting research experience, although research experience definitely will help. So, any questions about this? So some of you said you're thinking of applying to grad school. Do any of you have any questions about the application process or what grad school is like? Yep.
I'm interested in doing like counseling and clinical psychology. That would be masters at the minimum level, right? In order to be like a therapist?
Yeah, so it varies from province to province. I think there's increasing push towards having a PhD, but yes, you can have a master's and be a counselor, is my understanding. Clinical psych, you probably want the PhD, although clinical psychology is less about giving therapy. It's more about doing like tests and more, well, some people find it fun, but it's less interesting than I think what most people are expecting. But yeah, you can be a therapist and have a master's, although the PhD definitely helps. As I'll say later, counselors typically make about $200 an hour. So it is a good path if you're willing to do the work to get into grad school. Each step is competitive. It's competitive to get into these programs, but if you can do the work to get in, definitely worth it. One piece of advice I always give is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Apply to multiple programs. Now, I help myself sleep at night because I applied for PhD programs during COVID when they were cutting funding and letting in fewer people. But for whatever it's worth, I applied to 12 PhD programs and got into 3. And I had a pretty good, like I already had 1 publication, you know, my features of my application were good, but still only 3 out of 12. So it's good to apply widely. Any other questions? Okay, one thing I'll add. Some of you may be deciding what major to do, and here's my advice on that score. To a first approximation, there are 3 reasons for getting a BA in something. I'm sure you could think of others, but these are the first 3 that come to my mind. One reason is it's interesting. You know, people do take this into account, right? They ask themselves, you know, can I study this for 4 years without becoming suicidal? You know, that is a variable people take into account. And on this score, majoring in psychology is very good. I'm a little biased, but compared to some of the majors that shall go unnamed, you will learn a lot of interesting things. The second reason is you want to go from a bachelor's degree to grad school or some other kind of advanced degree, maybe med school or law school. But the standard path is the one I said earlier. And then to a job. So again, on this front, I think psychology is very good. Now, this gap here is competitive. It's tough to get in. But if you can get into grad school, a lot of the careers you can get are very good. So I mentioned the counselors make about $200 an hour, so that's pretty nice. Third reason, some people want to go straight from a bachelor's degree to a job. Now on this front, in my opinion, maybe I'll cut this out of the video for my professor reviews, but psychology is not the best. It does help to have a BA in something. That's true. So a lot of jobs are impressed, or I guess the employers will be impressed, just by the fact that you have a BA in something, because it shows that you're clever enough and hardworking enough to stick with it and finish the degree. But as far as specific marketable skills, a BA in psych alone doesn't give you that much, compared to, say, a degree in engineering or something. Having said that, and maybe I'll leave this part in, Douglas is actually good on this front. There are a number of specializations you can do with the bachelor's degree. So we have different streams you can take, some of which are designed to give you marketable skills for different types of psych-related work. So what I would say is, if you're not planning on going to graduate school and you want to work in the field, make sure you specialize in some way during the bachelor's degree. So that would be my advice there. And Douglas, as I say, is quite good on that front. Any questions about my thoughts here? So that's just my opinion, take it with a grain of salt, but for many of you that information may be useful. Okay, so today we'll be doing personality. So I was able to finish it on Monday, so even though we had this bit at the beginning, we should be able to finish this all before the end of class. So what is personality? So the way that psychologists standardly define personality is the following. So first of all, it has to be at least somewhat stable. When we think about how we use the term personality, it's different from a mood, right? You wouldn't say, oh, that person, feels extroverted right now. When we say they're extroverted, we're saying that's the way they tend to behave across time. So it's not like feeling, stressed out. It's not a transient state. And more specifically, it's a stable pattern in thinking or thought, feeling, and behaving. So people have kind of characteristic ways of thinking, feeling emotions, and behaving, and the label we attach to that is personality. So the question then is, how do we measure personality? The most common way of doing it is self-report. Right, so you give people a questionnaire, and people answer those questionnaires. So we saw back in chapter 2, there are issues with relying on self-report. So one way of validating those scales is looking at the extent to which self-report is correlated with what other people say about you. So people have done this where they give someone a personality scale and then ask their friends and family to rate how high this person is on these various questions. And to the extent that they're correlated, that gives us more confidence that their self-report is accurate. One commonly used self-report scale is the MMPI. This measures personality tendencies, but one of its main uses is also to diagnose different kinds of pathology, so different kinds of bad tendencies. So like a depressive tendency or a psychotic tendency. So it's a big scale, it has 338 questions, so it's a long scale. One nice feature it has is it has a number of lie or validity scales. So scales that are designed to measure how honest the person is being. So I mentioned this in chapter 2. There's at least 2 that I know of. One of them is designed to measure how much people are responding in a socially desirable way. So just trying to make themselves look good. So you include a number of socially desirable traits that are very rare. So I think I gave this example again back in chapter 2. You know, I've never done anything I'm ashamed of. I've never, made fun of someone. I've never missed a day of flossing. Those aren't the exact ones, but things like that where, maybe you're just a very exceptional person. You're the 1 in a million who all of those things are true of, but probably you're kind of bending your answers to make yourselves look good. There's another one that's sort of the opposite, which is about feigning symptoms. So you have a number of psychological conditions that are very rare. And again, if they say yes to all of them, probably they're trying to beef up their symptoms, maybe to get disability or some other reason. So, I hallucinate purple elephants. Maybe. You have like 5 things like that where it's a very rare symptom. Okay, starts to look like they're probably trying to feign symptoms. Okay. 2 different approaches to choosing which items go in these scales. So if we're putting together a self-report scale, 2 ways of choosing the items. The rational approach and the empirical approach. Now I forgot to mention this to my Monday class, but the MMPI is this one, is empirical. So what do these mean? So first of all, so rational means related to reason. So just thinking about things. So if I sit in an armchair and think about something, I'm engaged in reasoning or rationality in that sense. Empirical means having to do with observation. So the empiricist tradition in philosophy, people in that tradition argue that you can't just sit down and think about things to know if they're true. You have to go and look. Obviously a very important part of the scientific method. So if you're using the rational approach, you'll have some kind of theory about the trait in question, and you'll choose which items go in the scale on the basis of that theory. So, for example, maybe you have a theory that depression is really about rumination. Rumination means like thinking about things a lot. So if you sit down and ruminate, it means you're going over something in your head over and over again. So that's your theory. Your theory is that's what leads to depression, or that's the essence of depression, if you like. And so then, when you're constructing your depression scale, you'll choose items that have to do with rumination. If you're using the empirical approach, you choose items on the basis of observed correlations. So, again, in the case of depression, it turns out that there is a correlation between reading newspaper comics and feeling depressed. So if you just measure, you ask people, how depressed do you feel? And you ask them, how often do you read the newspaper comics? There's a correlation. I forget which direction it is. Let's say it's positive. I don't remember. So there's a positive correlation. Okay, then we include the newspaper comic item in the scale. Do we have a theory about why? Nope. But it's correlated with it as a matter of observation. We can see the correlation when we do the studies, so we include it in the scale. Does that distinction make sense? See some looks of confusion. So, rational approach, you have a theory about the trait that you're measuring. Empirical approach, you observe a correlation between measures of the trait and some other measure. Then you include that other measure in the scale. And as I say, the MMPI is a classic case of the empirical approach. Any questions before I erase this? Okay, now we're going to see a lot of Sigmund Freud later in the chapter. That section's a lot of fun. So, how many of you have heard the name Sigmund Freud? Have we talked about him in this class? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think so. So in 1100, we've already talked about him. But Freud is probably the most famous psychologist ever. So he emphasized the importance of the unconscious, of thinking and other psychological processes that we are unaware of, as well as some other crazy stuff. But that insight is good. It was very important that someone emphasized that. Suppose that you're a Freudian. Suppose you think that the unconscious is very important. Well, then we don't want to rely on self-report, because much of what drives people, they're not aware of, so they can't tell you about it. So if you're operating from that perspective, and by the way, the broad term for a Freudian, or also like a neo-Freudian, so neo means like new or modified. So some people, they take some stuff from Freud, but ignore some of the crazy sex stuff that we'll talk about later. But the umbrella term is psychodynamic. You'll see that term come up. So that includes Freud, but also modified Freudians, who still have a big place for the unconscious, but maybe they don't think Freud was literally Jesus Christ, which some people are close to thinking. So people in this tradition use what are called projective tests. And before giving a definition, I'll give some examples, because then the definition will make more sense. The first one is the Rorschach. How many of you have seen this? I'll show you a picture first. Probably a lot of you have seen this in the movies. How many of you have, so this is an example of a Rorschach, at least if it stands up. Work. This is an example of a Rorschach ink blot test. How many of you have seen this in the movies? So the idea is you put a blot of ink or a few blots of ink on a paper, fold it in half so that it's symmetrical, and then you get this kind of goofy looking pattern. And what the clinician will then do is show you a series of these and ask for each of them, what do you see? And you're supposed to kind of say the first image that comes to your mind. So someone shout out, what do you see? No one sees anything? You're unable to see it. Someone tell me, what's a shape that pops out?
It's like a mask.
Someone says like a mask, okay, yeah.
Looks like a dog, kind of.
Like a dog, okay.
A bird.
A bird, okay. I haven't heard bird before, interesting. So I'm not a clinician, so I don't know how to administer this, but there is a rule book for interpreting this. People have debated the validity of the measure, but it is still actually quite commonly used. So here are some other examples. So that is, as I say, the Rorschach ink blot test. Another one is the thematic apperception test. So both of these should be on the key terms. And here's an example of the thematic apperception test. So here you're shown an image with a clear shape, like it's clear this is a woman beside a couch. In this case, you have to say what happened right before, and again, kind of say what comes to your mind. So, anyone want to say what happened in the scene right before this?
Something horrible.
So more specific, like a specific event.
She got a phone call that someone died.
She got a phone call that someone died. So yeah, so that's a common one. Yep. Someone at the back.
She got into a fight with someone.
Got into a fight with someone? Yeah, good. So, and if you do enough of these, you're supposed to extract patterns of the kinds of answers that people tend to give. So yeah, here's some other examples. So you show pictures like this, and you ask, what's the first story that comes to your mind about what happened right before? So, what's the definition of a projective test then? A projective test is the presentation of an ambiguous stimulus. So ambiguous meaning it's not clear what it is, that you have to project onto. So the ink blot case is a really clear example, right? You have to impose or project a pattern onto this. It's just a random ink blot. The person didn't paint this on purpose, so it's supposed to provide a hint as to what goes on in your unconscious mind. That's the way they would describe it. So an ambiguous stimulus that you have to project onto, project a pattern onto. Okay, we'll have some fun. We'll do another projective test. This one, I have very serious doubts about the validity. In fact, I'm quite confident it's not valid, but it is kind of fun. You can do it with your friends and see what they say. So what I want you to do on a piece of paper or on your tablet or whatever is imagine you're going on a walk through the woods, and I'll describe various steps along that walk, and write down some adjectives when I ask you to. Just kind of just descriptions of what the scenario is like at these various steps. So the first step is, you enter the woods, you enter a forest. Describe what the forest appears like. So what does the forest look like? Write down some brief adjectives or descriptions. Okay, you start walking down a path, so there's a path or trail that you're on. Describe the path or trail. What does it look like? Okay, you then come up to a river. Describe the river. Okay, you have to get to the other side of the river. How do you do that? Whatever strategy comes to your mind, and there are no rules, that's how you get across. Okay, next you come up to a bear. Describe the bear. You have to get past the bear. How do you do that? You come up to a wall. Describe the wall. Only two more after this. Okay, you have to get to the other side of the wall. How do you do it? And last question, what do you see once you get to the other side of the wall? Okay, so here's the coding for it. Here's how to interpret it. Again, don't place any seriousness on this. This is more so for fun, but it does count as a projective test. How you view the forest is indicative of how you view your friends and friendships, with the trees and other objects standing in for your friends. The path is how you view your life trajectory, how your life path is going. Kind of easy to interpret, right? We all know what windy means, and so on. The river is how you view romantic love. And then how you get across, obviously, is how you approach romantic love. How avoidant you are about it. And then the bear is how you view your problems and how you deal with your problems. And then everything related to the wall has to do with death and how you view death. So, as I say, more for fun, but that is a projective test. Any questions before I erase the projective test stuff? Okay, next. We'll talk about the trait approach, which is probably the most important approach to personality today. So I earlier defined personality as a stable pattern in thinking, feeling, and behaving, or thought, emotion, and behavior, if you like. A trait is like one piece of that. So a trait is one aspect of that stable pattern. So one example of a trait that most of you have heard of is extroversion, right? Extroversion would be a trait that you can be high or low in. So lots of traits out there. And the question is, how do we develop a theory of traits? And the approach that they stole from intelligence researchers is factor analysis. So you might remember back in the intelligence chapter that we use this when looking at mental ability tests. So you give a variety of cognitive problems, so vocabulary problems, mathematical problems, spatial problems, and you find that they all cluster together. You can extract one factor that explains a lot of the variation in performance on those questions. Personality researchers did the same thing. You give people large batteries of questions. So you ask people, how outgoing are you? How creative are you? How often do you yell at people? As many questions as you can think of, and you try to see how they clump together. So two early views are kind of opposite extremes. Ising thought you could get away with just two. With just two factors, you could explain a lot of the variation in personality. And those were introversion, extroversion, I'll just say extroversion, and instability, stability. So those were, for him, the main two dimensions along which people vary. So all the items you give correlate with these to some degree. Cattell is kind of the other extreme. He thought there were 16, and no, you don't have to know what they are. But if you zoom in on patterns of correlations, you can get 16 if you do it his way. And this is partly a matter of choice. I mean, if you really wanted, you could make each question a personality dimension. I mean, that would be kind of silly. There's really no point in that. But there's something of a consensus in personality research today that you get the best bang for your buck with 5. So how many of you have heard of the Big 5? 1 or 2. So today, the consensus among personality researchers is that it's best to think of personality as breaking down into 5 dimensions. This is not in order of importance. So the acronym is used as OCEAN. If anything, E and N are the most important. They're basically the same as these two in Ising. But this order is helpful for remembering them. So in this order, the first one is openness, or openness to experience. So if you are high in this dimension, you are more creative, you like trying new things, you don't like being stuck in a rut or stuck in routine. And if you're low, you're more rigid, resistant to change, and so on. This one of the 5 has the strongest correlation with political attitudes. So people who are higher in openness are on average more politically left of center, which makes sense. And if those who are lower are on average more conservative. They like things staying the same. The next one is conscientiousness. So not consciousness. So consciousness is being aware and awake. Conscientiousness means being hardworking, diligent, and attentive to detail. So if you're higher in this dimension, you work harder, you keep a schedule, you're more organized, etc. And again, when you think about these traits, think about them in terms of factor analysis. All we're saying is, when you do the analysis this way, you get 5 clusters of questions that are positively correlated. right? So this is one cluster of questions. That means that, you know, people who, let's say openness, people who say I am creative are more likely to also say I like trying new foods. And they're less likely to say, you know, I'm very conservative or whatever. So it's 5 clusters of questions that go together. The next one, which is the same as Ising's, is extroversion. Well, it's a little different because Ising's includes more, but same basic idea. So if you're higher in extroversion, you are more confident, outgoing, you like people. So that's what this one is. And so there's no introversion term in the Big Five. You are just higher or lower in extroversion. So some of you may have heard the term introvert. In this model, that would just mean you're low in extroversion. And crucially, none of these are binary. So how many of you know the Myers-Briggs? Like you get INTJ or whatever. The problem with that is it gives you like one letter or the other. If you take a Big Five scale, which we'll do later in this class, you don't get a either or. You'll get a like a point on a range. And like most things, most people will be in the middle. So some people think they're really unique. Like, oh, I'm a bit of both. But like most people are close in the middle. It's a bell curve. So you'll have your really extroverted people and your really low extroversion people. Most people will be somewhere in the middle of the curve. A is agreeableness. And these are just names. What matters is the questions that are included, but some people look at the name and think, oh, that means agreeing with people a lot, which is sort of part of it, but the core of this trait is being nice and polite, right? So you're a pleasant person. You're compassionate, empathetic, etc. You don't like starting fights. So if you're too high, you can be a pushover. That's the risk of being too high. If you're lower, you're kind of a dick, right? Kind of a mean, not empathetic, maybe evil if you're low enough kind of person. So that's different from extroversion, right? You could be high in extroversion but low in agreeableness. You can be very outgoing and socially confident but still an asshole, right? Psychopaths are like that. And then the last one is neuroticism. So neuroticism is sort of the opposite of stability, or like it would mean being low in stability if you're high in this. So neuroticism means emotional instability. So if you're higher in neuroticism, you are more, your moods change more frequently, you are more susceptible to things like depression, anxiety, or irritability. If you're low in neuroticism, you're more stable, right? That's basically the inverse of stability. So yeah, I guess the terms. Okay, any questions about the Big Five? Okay, so now we'll do a Big Five test in class. Now, it's weird. On my Monday, when I gave this to my Monday class, a handful of people said at the end they had to pay. Well, if you have to pay, don't pay, obviously. And I swear I don't have shares in this website or anything, but you can look up other ones online, but this one's really good. And most people didn't have it happen. I wondered after if maybe it makes you pay if you're really agreeable or something. That'd be funny. But so the website is big5-test.com. And if nothing else, even if you don't get your score for some reason because it makes you pay, you'll get a sense of what kinds of questions are on the test. And you can probably sense which of the 5 they're getting at. So it should take about 10 minutes, so go ahead and give that a whirl. Okay, show of hands, how many are done now? Show of hands, was anyone asked to pay? That's so weird. I wonder if my Monday class was pulling my leg or something. Okay, so if you didn't quite finish, you can finish during the break, but that should give you a sense of the kinds of questions you'll see on the Big Five. I'll give you a few numbers. Don't worry about the details here for the test, but just to compare it with the reliability and validity of IQ, just to give you a sense. So remember that the test retest reliability of IQ. So that's, you give the person at one time, give it to them again, and look at how similarly they score. For IQ, if you're looking at, say, 20 years, the numbers I showed were like 0.7 to 0.8. So even after a long time, quite high. For a similarly long period of time, the test-retest reliability of this is a little bit under 0.5. So still good, but not as high as IQ. For criterion validity, it's even lower. So for IQ, the correlation between IQ and, say, school grades was around 0.5, so moderate size. The criterion validity of the Big Five is typically around 0.3, so for different kinds of things. Now, what do I mean by that? So I have some examples here. Don't memorize these, but it'll give you kind of a flavor. So for openness, one thing they've looked at, this is in a big meta-analysis, is the correlation between openness on these kinds of scales and likelihood of playing a musical instrument, which that's the kind of thing you'd expect, right? Correlation about 0.2. So in the right direction, but not super large. Conscientiousness and grades around 0.2, again. Another example, the correlation between extroversion and popularity, which is the kind of thing you'd expect, around 0.4, so a bit higher, but still not super high. They've looked at the correlation between agreeableness and honesty, again around 0.2. Last one, neuroticism. They've looked at the correlation between neuroticism and diagnosis of depression or anxiety as a condition, around 0.3. So, and that's what you find. The correlations are in the direction that you'd expect based on what these are purported to measure, but they're not super high. We'll actually come back to this when we talk about Walter Mischel. Okay. What about the biological underpinnings of these traits? So remember that so Eysenck had two, and they're pretty much these two. He had a theory about what each of these were about. So for extroversion, he thought that it had to do with under-arousal of the nervous system. Now, this will sound counterintuitive at first, but there is some empirical support for this. Eysenck conjectured that people who are high in extroversion have under-aroused nervous systems. So their default level of arousal is low. That might seem like the opposite of what you'd expect, but his conjecture was that basically they're bored by default, and therefore they crave extra stimulation. So they go to more parties, they try to make new friends, try to meet new people. Whereas people who are lower, their brains are over-aroused and they're like, I'm good. I don't need any more drama in my life. I've got enough stimulation as it is. Neuroticism, he thought it had to do with, this will be more intuitive, suddenness of change. So the more chaotic their nervous systems are, the more neurotic they are on average. Okay. Do those two conjectures make sense? As with the intelligence chapter, there's a section on twin studies and heritability. So for most psychological traits, the heritability is around 0.4 to 0.5, so 40 to 50% of the variance. IQ is a bit higher than that, but personality is right there in the middle, so around 40 to 50% of the variance in these traits is due to genes, if you trust the standard twin study methods. So identical twins are more similar in these traits than non-identical twins are. And they are still similar even if they are raised in separate families, the identical twins. So that's some evidence that genes play a substantial role. One surprising finding, I think most people that's not very surprising. It's like, yeah, it makes sense, genes would explain maybe half of the variation, but what people often expect is that the other half is, the environment half, is something like the parental environment, how your parents raise you and treat you. But maybe the most surprising finding from behavior genetics is the effect of what psychologists call the shared environment. So the shared environment is the environment shared by siblings. So the home you grow up in, the school you go to, the neighborhood you're in, your parents, etc. The effect of the shared environment is often close to zero. In fact, it's usually close to zero for psychological traits that we can measure. So just to be really concrete, if you measure the Big Five and you do it for adoptive siblings, so siblings who are raised in the same shared environment, but don't have any genes in common, they both have different biological parents, they're somewhat similar when they're still at home. By the time they grow up, they are typically not similar at all. The correlation is often close to zero. Which means that that environment half, whatever it is, it's probably not the home environment. So there's different conjectures as to what it is. Could be peer groups, could be random events, could be various other things. For many things, and personality is a classic case, it seems to not be the shared environment. The book has a brief discussion of this. Any questions before actually, no, I'll leave them up because, sorry, there's one more section. So there's also a section on sex differences in the Big Five. And here, for most of them, they're fairly small. You need big samples to detect them. The biggest ones are for the last two, agreeableness and neuroticism. So for both of those, females are on average higher. And I'll show you an actual graph from a real data set to give you a sense of what these look like. So this is the difference for agreeableness. So as you can see, it's mostly overlap. So this is the females curve and this is the males curve. So there's males and females at every level of agreeableness, or at least almost every level. Where the differences get larger is when you go to the extremes. So one property of overlapping bell curves is a small or moderate difference in the middle, in the average, can lead to big changes in the extremes. So in this case, if you zoom in right here, so this is the people who are very low in agreeableness, so maybe kind of psychopathic, right? Very low in empathy and compassion. It's almost all males, which is not all that surprising, I suppose. So the book has a discussion of different theories about what causes the differences. You can read about that if you're curious. I don't have much to add to it. So undoubtedly, cultural variables, influence our personalities. But one thing that the book notes is these differences, small though they are, persist in more gender-equal societies. So if you can look at countries with higher scores of gender equality, you still find these differences. Okay. Now, this is probably a good time for a break. So let's take a break until 11. Okay, so we're now done the trait theories. Next, we'll talk about our good friend, Sigmund Freud. So, Freud is an interesting character. as I mentioned in the first half of class, he is probably most famous for emphasizing the importance of unconscious mental processes. And he had a number of ideas. Some of the ones we'll talk about now, in my judgment, are empirically well supported. Some of the other ideas are pretty crazy, but they were historically influential, so they're still included in basically every intro psych textbook. So we'll have to know about that. So I'll start with the structure of the mind. I now realize I closed. So the distinction I'm going to make now is separate from the distinction between conscious and unconscious processing. There is overlap, like different aspects of the mind break down into being both conscious and unconscious, but don't worry about that. The three ingredients I'm talking about here are the id, the ego, and the superego. These are bad English translations. So in the German, the word that's translated as id means it. This is the animalistic part of human nature. So this is raw animal desire. So desire for food, for sex, for dominance, all of those would fall within the purview of the id. So babies, when they're born, according to Freud, are all id. Just me, 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 I want, nothing else. The ego emerges later, and the ego is associated with the self. So the German word means I. That's for some reason translated ego here, but so after a while you start to notice that you can't always get what you want, at least not right away. So it's not a good strategy to just cry every time you want something. You have to start to be more strategic and realistic. And that kind of consideration, babies are of course not capable of, but once the ego has emerged, then the kid can start to plan things out and be more realistic. The last to develop is the superego, which is your sense of right and wrong, so your sense of conscience. So you absorb different moral norms from your culture, and that's the purview of the superego. As an aside, Freud thought that women never fully developed a superego, so that's kind of crazy, but he's a man of his time. Also, and this will explain some of the later ideas too, Freud was very fond of cocaine. I don't know if I've mentioned that in this class, but the man loved cocaine. So when we get to his theory of child development, some of the ideas you can probably blame the cocaine for. Okay, so those are the three components. If you want a really simplistic way of remembering, the angel on your shoulder and demon on your shoulder is not too far off. So, the classic cartoon image. Always takes a second. So imagine you work in an office, you're grown and you're married, and the hot secretary is hitting on you, and it says, yes, you should pursue this, you should do this. And the superego says, no, that would be morally wrong. The ego is the decider, if we want to use that language. So the ego is the self, but these other things are also components of the human mind. Another thing that the ego does is what Freud called defense mechanisms. So various anxiety-provoking thoughts and bits of information enter the mind, and the ego does some damage control. If there's a certain threatening piece of information, it will try to cope with that adaptively in different ways. And some of these have received empirical support. In my opinion, there's a lot going for these. My supervisor and I actually We're in the process of writing a paper on it, which for various reasons we decided to not pursue, but there is support for some of these. So, I'll actually just move this up. Any questions on these three? So the first defense mechanism, which is the most basic, is repression. Probably a lot of you have heard this term. So repression is just, if there's an unpleasant thought or an unpleasant memory, you just push it out of awareness. You repress it into the unconscious. So this could be a traumatic memory, could be just something you don't want to think about. So this is the most basic defense mechanism. The next one is rationalization. This is where you tell yourself a story which has the implication that something that seems bad is actually good. So you get dumped and you say, no, this is good because now I can meet new people. So this is what the kids call, or at least did until recently, cope or copium. Some of my students said people still say cope. Can you back up? People still say cope? It's not totally gone? Okay, so rationalization pretty close to cope. Or copium. The next one is reaction formation. This is where you display an emotion that's the opposite of the one you actually feel. So this can be used if the emotion is unacceptable socially for some reason, or embarrassing. So this is the strategy of every grade 6 boy, right? Little Johnny has a crush on Susie. What does Johnny do? Shoves her, pulls her hair, calls her mean names. And then everyone around says, Johnny, I think you have a crush on Susie. No, I hate her. And the only person who believes that is Johnny. Everyone else knows what's going on. So that would be an example. This is also the subject of one of the funniest studies ever done. If you're in my 1100 class, you may have heard me say this. This is one of those studies that you probably would not get away with doing today. They got a bunch of men into the lab, and they gave them a scale that measured homophobia, so how much they dislike gay people. And they hooked up a certain part of their body to a device that measured blood flow. This is a real study. And you'll probably see where this is going. They showed them gay porn. And the men who reported the most dislike of gay men had the most blood flow during the gay porn. So, plausibly an example of reaction formation. When they're like, oh, that's terrible. I can't believe people would do that. In fact. So, as I say, some of these have received some empirical support. Next is projection. So this is where you have an emotion of some kind, and you project it onto someone else. And when I say project, I mean you think that they're feeling it. You don't want to acknowledge that you're feeling it, so you project it onto someone else. So I get home and, let's say I'm really pissed off. I look at my brother, well, I live on my own now, but if I went home to visit my family and my brother's twiddling his thumbs or something ambiguous, and I go, he looks really pissed off. Really, I'm pissed off and just projecting that emotion onto him. Another one is regression. So not repression, but regression. So to regress means to go backwards. So you have a unpleasant state of some kind, and you revert to a childlike kind of behavior. So you play with your favorite stuffed animal or something after a bad breakup, or you watch your favorite cartoon from when you were younger, something like Oh, I mentioned this to my Monday class. These are very easy to write test questions about. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. The next one, which some people confuse with projection, but make sure you keep them distinct, is displacement. So, again, you feel an emotion, but you're, for some reason, not allowed to express it, so you redirect the emotion to someone else. So let's say, and I think most of you, when you hear this, will admit that you or someone you know has done this before. Let's say you're really mad at me. You didn't do well on the test, and you're like, I hate David, whatever. You can't come to me and tell me to go fuck myself. I mean, you could, but it probably wouldn't be a good idea. So what do? You go home and tell your brother to go fuck himself, right? You redirect the anger to someone else. The next one I'm going to skip because it comes up later when it makes more sense. The last one, which is widely considered to be a very healthy one, is sublimation. This is when you take the negative energy, the unpleasant emotion, and redirect it towards doing something productive. Lots of Instagram reels about this, right? You get dumped. What does the guy do? Goes to the gym and makes gains. That would be sublimation. If you redirect the sadness or the frustration about the breakup into the gains, that would be sublimation. Okay, as I say, easy to make test questions about these. Any questions about them? Yep.
Sorry, could you say displacement again?
For sure, yeah. So you're angry or have some other emotion for some reason. I used me, but let's say you're mad at your boss. You can't yell at your boss, so you go home and kick the cat or something. Redirect the, don't do that, but hypothetically, that would be displacement. I mean, unless the cat really deserves, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so as I say, this set of terms, I think there is some empirical support for. The next bit is where things really go off the rails. So, and that's Freud's theory of child development. I'll note up front, Freud did exactly 0 studies on kids. So a lot of this stuff, who knows where he got it? Well, I mentioned earlier one possibility. So, for starters, for Freud, everything is about sex. Sexual motivation is the most important motivation in his theory. And psychosexual energy, or libido, is there right from the get-go. And during child development, what happens is the libido or psychosexual energy moves from one erogenous zone to another. And if you don't go through the stages properly, you'll develop a fixation at those different parts of the body. So the first stage, which is the oral stage, is about 0 to 1. So this is, of course, when breastfeeding is happening. So the mouth is the center of psychosexual energy at this stage. If you don't go through the stage normally, you're at risk of developing an oral fixation. So let's say that your mother is too indulgent with breastfeeding or doesn't breastfeed enough, so either extreme can be a problem, according to Freud. You may later become obsessed with mouth-related things. So you eat too much, drink too much, smoke, or what have you. So if you come into the Freud's office and you say, "Doc, I can't stop drinking," he'll say, your mother must not have breastfed you properly. Which, that makes sense. So that's the first stage. Next one, I think the key term says 2 to 3. You'll see different numbers in different books. What does it say in the key terms? Anyone have 2 to 3? Okay. So the anal stage, this is about toilet training. So it's all about learning that, hey, you can't poop all the time, even if you really want to. and parents can be too strict with this or not strict enough, and then that can stay an erogenous zone longer than it should if you don't go through the stage properly, and then you can develop what he calls an anal fixation. There are here two ways to do this. So there's two types of anal fixation. There's anal retentive fixation and anal expulsive fixation. So anal retentive is you become too controlling when you're older. So if you're kind of OCD, too organized, too rigid, and so on, that means you have this type of anal fixation. So it's not said very much anymore, but if you watch older movies, you may hear people say, "Oh, you're so anal." They mean anal retentive. That kind of made its way into popular language. Like it means you're too strict and too picky. Expulsive is the opposite, right? So this is you're too careless, too lazy, too disorganized. And you go to the clinic, you meet Dr. Freud, and you say, I'm too disorganized. I'm not doing well in Psych 1200. What's my problem? And Freud's answer will be your toilet training. That's the explanation. If this isn't weird enough, 3 or 4 to 6. Is the phallic stage. Phallic means the male organ. That's where that term comes from. So this is when kids discover their gender and the gender of their parents, and this leads to various problems. Some of you may have heard of this. It's one of the famous or infamous bits of Freud's theory. So it differs depending on whether you're a boy or a girl. If you're a boy, you go through the Oedipus complex. This is when you are sexually attracted to your mother, but you discover that your father has your mother, and so you're mad at your father. You hate your father. Additionally, you become afraid that your father will cut said organ off. Freud calls this castration anxiety. And that comes up over and over again in his work. He thinks a lot of anxiety is ultimately a product of castration anxiety. For women, they have what's called the Electra complex, which is the mirror image of the Oedipus complex. So they're in love with their dad and hate their mom. So, weird stuff. If you want to remember which is which, the Oedipus complex is named after a Greek myth. In this myth, a young boy, it's prophesied by the oracle that he will grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. And to avoid this, they banish the son at a young age. So he grows up not knowing who his parents are, but then through a series of events, he winds up meeting his father in the street and killing him in a duel. And then through another series of events, winds up marrying his mom. So they met their destiny on the road they chose to avoid it. So what Freud said is, yes, that myth expresses what we all really want when we are 5. So, pretty crazy stuff. Here, though, there's another term which is mentioned as a defense mechanism, but it's the healthy conclusion to this stage. So, what's supposed to happen by the end is you reach something called identification, which is where you decide, so if you're a boy, you go, my dad's not so bad. Yeah, he has my mom. I can't have my mom. That's too bad. But my dad's a boy like me. I want to grow up to be like dad. So you identify with the same-sex parent at the end of this stage. And then same if you're a girl. You decide that you don't hate your mom anymore. She's a girl like you, and you want to grow up to be like her. Okay, 7 to 12. Any questions so far about the crazy stuff? You guys are more shy, I guess. My Monday class, normally, because they're in the evening, they're like 6:30 at night, and when I'm in the second half of class, they're barely awake and don't say anything. All of a sudden here, loads of questions. So, I don't know what that says about them, but all of a sudden very interested in Freud. So the next one is the latency stage. Latent means like to be asleep or dormant. So during this stage, psychosexual energy is temporarily repressed, and you focus on other things. So instead of sexually related things, you focus on developing yourself. So doing well in school, making friends, developing social skills, etc. And then after you hit puberty, you hit the genital stage, where you'll have normal sexual desire from then till you die, is the idea. What does normal mean? I don't know. Okay, any questions about the 5 stages? Yep.
When Freud would diagnose people with these things, would there be any like action that he would take after? Like, what do you do if you like?
Yeah, that's
you
a
had,
good
like,
question. Yeah,
mental retentive fixation.
That's a good question. So I actually don't know. So I'm not a psychoanalyst. So if you're interested in this stuff and want to know like details like that, a lot of psych departments will have one token Freudian. So there are very few Freudians left in psychology, but here at Douglas, Raquel Chapdelaine, so she would not make as many jokes in this section as I would. She has a painting of Freud in her office, so if you ever want to take a class with Raquel, she would probably know the answer to something like that. And here, if you want to get in trouble in her class, this is my overall take on Freud. I don't know if I've said this before, but science is essentially a 2-step process. The philosopher Karl Popper put it well when he said, science is a matter of conjecture and refutation. This is the same guy who came up with the term falsifiability, like theory should be falsifiable. So conjecturing means making a hypothesis, right? You make a guess. And what's often neglected is that step is a creative act. You have to kind of make it up. You don't know what's true, so you say, maybe this is true. So that involves creativity. Step 2 is when you put on your rational hat and think, okay, what predictions can I deduce from this guess, and how can I test them with observation? Freud was really good at step 1, right? Very creative, very good at making up new ideas, but with creativity, sometimes you get, crazy ideas that come out. Maybe not so good at rigorously testing them. So if you want to get in trouble, you can say that in Raquel's class. And if she sets you straight, maybe you can set me straight. Wrong, but anyways, so that's Freud. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I just have 2 questions. The approximate age is when it's like developed?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the key task is what?
So sort of overcoming it. So with oral fixation, you're supposed to move on to the next one. But if your mother doesn't breastfeed you properly, you kind of stay there. So if you become an overeater, Freud would say you sort of stayed in the oral stage, at least to some extent. So I've added a few people that you'll see in other classes too, to some extent. Especially, by the way, if you go to like a humanities or an English course, the Freudian people come up more often. They, in a way, have more influence there than they do in psychology. But there are a number of people that are called neo-Freudians. So neo means new or modified. Some of these people were students of Freud, and they thought, okay, Freud's got some insight here, like unconscious reasoning, etc., or unconscious processes, but maybe some of this stuff is a little weird. Maybe we'll change that up. One that you'll see in 1100, but not here, is Erik Erikson, who had a theory of development that built on this, but got rid of some of the weird stuff. But 3 examples that I want you to know for this class are all listed in the key terms. So as long as you know their basic idea, that's fine. You don't have to know a lot of detail for these 3. So one example of a neo-Freudian is Karen, and the name isn't pronounced like it looks. it should be. It's pronounced Horney. So Horney took issue with some of the sexism in Freud's theory. In particular, she took issue with the idea that women, when they are young, have penis envy. This is another term from Freud. So Freud thought that women were jealous of that. Horney flipped it on its head and said, no, men have womb envy. Now this one actually is still kind of crazy. Sample size of 1. I have never been jealous of this, but that's just me. Another one, and this person was actually a student of Freud's, Alfred Adler. Now, if you were a student of Freud, like you worked with him, if you deviated from his theories at all, you kind of got kicked out of the club. You had to be a dogmatic Freudian to stick around. And Adler did get kicked out. He thought that it wasn't sex that was the main human motivation, it was the drive for superiority. He thought that what motivates us is to kind of move up the hierarchy and become better than people. And if you didn't do that, if you showed signs of poor ability in school or something, or other measures of sports, socializing, whatever, you would develop an inferiority complex. And would engage in different kinds of compensation. So this is where the old joke comes from that, you know, guys with big trucks are insecure and compensating. That would be a very Adlerian idea. A buddy of mine at work once made the funny observation that we never make the opposite inference. Like if a guy has a big truck, people say, that guy's really insecure. But if he has a piece of shit car, no one goes, wow, look at that guy. But, anyway, so that's Adler. Another student of Freud's that kind of moved away from the club was Carl Jung. How many of you have heard the name Carl Jung? Yeah, so in some other classes you'll see him. So he emphasized the importance of what he called the collective unconscious. Jung was really interested in cross-cultural work, so work looking at commonalities between different cultures in terms of stories or themes. So take like hero stories. People who look at hero stories have argued that you'll find common patterns. For Jung, those common patterns are reflections of the collective unconscious, so unconscious ideas that we all have in common. He thought that the collective unconscious was populated by different archetypes, so different themes or ideas. So like a hero archetype would be one example. As a result, Jung was more friendly than Freud to religion. Freud was a very dogmatic atheist, very critical of religion, wrote a book called Future of an Illusion, whereas Jung saw religious ideas as being an important part of the collective unconscious. Okay, any questions on the Neo-Freudians? Next view, which there's less space devoted to, is the humanistic perspective. So the way to think about the humanists is they had a very positive vision of human nature. So the Freudians, especially Freud himself, have a rather bleak view. The humanists are a more upbeat bunch. So they think that we all have a self-actualizing tendency, so we have a drive to achieve our potential, and we should cultivate that tendency. So you may remember that hierarchy of needs from Maslow. Maslow was a humanist. We will also see these people come up again in the therapy chapter. Someone named Carl Rogers applied the humanistic perspective to therapy. But he also had an idea that's relevant to personality, and that's the idea of the self concept. So this is the set of beliefs that you have about yourself. So, I believe that I am extroverted. I believe that I'm good at basketball. I believe that I have a good singing voice. Whatever. All the beliefs you have about yourself. And then there's another circle, which is your lived experience. This would be a bad kind of case. What you want is overlap between the two. To the extent that there's overlap, that's congruence. That means your experience is consistent with what you believe about yourself. If there's non-overlap, here's an example of this region. So this circle is your lived experience, this circle is your self-concept. If you believe that you're really good at basketball, but every time you play you get your ass kicked, then that experience is here. It's inconsistent or incongruent with your self-concept. So part of what Rogers wants to do is get people to accept themselves as they are, and therefore have more congruence. Okay, another idea that relates to, I guess, self-actualization that comes from the humanist tradition is the idea of being in a flow state. So I'll say what that means. This comes from someone with a really weird spelling for their name, but it's pronounced Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And here's how flow works. So if you imagine a two-dimensional space, and the bottom, I'll get the order right. Yeah, the bottom is ability in the book. So this axis is ability, so how good you are at a given task. And then this one is the challenge or difficulty of the task. You want to be in this zone. This is the flow zone. So I just mentioned basketball. So if you're really good at basketball, so like you're here, but you're playing a game that's really low in difficulty, so you're playing with a bunch of kids, in this space you'll be bored. You could apply this to a job too, right? If you're really skilled at something, but you're doing a really easy job, you'll be bored. Take the basketball case again. If you're average at basketball, but you're playing, for some reason get put in the NBA, you'll have anxiety. Right? It'll be overwhelming trying to keep up with the task in question. So neither of these are good. Flow is when your ability matches how difficult the task is, and then you can lose yourself in the task. So many of you have probably had the experience of doing something that is challenging, but you're good at it, so it matches your ability, and I wouldn't say you become unconscious, but you become much less aware of yourself. And that's what he means by flow. Okay, any questions about the humanists? As I say, this is a briefer section. Okay, the next one, sometimes these are grouped together. is the existentialist approach. This comes out of a tradition in philosophy, which is existentialism. The core of existentialism, both in psychology and philosophy, is, it's weird that it's grouped with the humanists, because this is a very bleak worldview. The existentialists think life is meaningless, we're all going to die, and this gives us angst. So angst is their term for the anxiety associated with the human condition, which is awareness that all of our goals will come to nothing because one day we're all going to die. So this influenced a view we saw earlier, which is the terror management approach. Those both come out of a similar tradition. So what many people do, and the terror management people say this too, is they have various illusions to comfort them, to try to distract them from the angst. But what the existentialists say is you should embrace it. You should, my analogy for this is, it's like we're all followed by a cactus, this specter, this haunting thing, this painful awareness that we're all going to die and that life is basically meaningless. And we try to distance ourselves from it and say, no, I'm going to ignore that, or tell myself a story in which the cactus isn't there. The existentialist solution is hug the cactus, just like embrace it, and then it's okay. That's basically their approach. So just, yes, I'm going to die, life is meaningless. Where do we go from there? You don't have to agree, but that's basically what they recommend. Okay, any questions on that? Not too many terms there, but... So next we're going to talk about someone named Walter Mischel. And, ooh, I forgot to show a clip. Oh yes, okay, so just pause there. One thing I was going to say about Freud, so back when we were talking about the crazy Freud stuff. I mean, it's not enough just to say, oh, that seems crazy. You have to give a more sophisticated critique than that. And the most common critique of Freud is that his ideas are unfalsifiable. So it relates to what I said about Popper and conjecture and refutation. In science, we want ideas to be falsifiable, meaning they are able to be proven wrong. If there's an idea that you cannot prove wrong, that counts against the theory. You want the theory to be such that you can make predictions on the basis of that theory. And if the predictions don't come true, then the theory is wrong. It's been falsified. And at least in the way that Freud applied and defended his theory, many have argued it's not falsifiable. So think about the idea that young boys hate their father. So you try to test this. You look at a boy and he hits his father. Freud would say, see, that's evidence that he hates his father. Suppose the boy hugs his father. That's reaction formation. He's displaying the opposite emotion of what he really feels. Okay, what about this boy? He's ignoring his father and playing with the blocks. That's sublimation. He's taking all that negative energy and his hatred for his father and redirecting it into playing with blocks. So the problem is, no matter what the kid does, it can be taken as evidence that the boy hates his father, so the idea is unfalsifiable. And I had a clip of a scene from the show House that's a nice example of this. So all that happens in the clip is the woman says to the guy, basically, I think you like me, and that you're treating me in a bad way because you're engaged in a Freudian defense mechanism. And then he says, well, what if I'm nice to you? And she says, then you're getting in touch with your real feelings. And she actually quotes Freud in defense of this. And he's like, so no matter what I do, it's evidence that I like you. It's a similar kind of example. Okay, so I have one more clip to show later, but the audio is not as important for that. So the next person we have to talk about is Walter Mischel. Is it two L's? I always forget. No. So Mischel was a critic of the trait theories. So think of like the Big Five and the other trait theories we saw. And you have the same information basically that he did. When you look at the amount of correlation between traits and behavior, they're small to moderate. They're not especially big. They leave a lot of the variance unexplained. And so Mischel is famous for emphasizing the importance of the situation in determining behavior. So remember when I listed those correlations between the Big Five and different kinds of behavior, they were typically around 0.3. And if you think about it, like here's a concrete example that I think most of you can identify with. So you all just did a Big Five test in which you got a score on extroversion. So some of you were low, some were high, some were in the middle. But most of you, no matter where you are in that range, will be more or less outgoing depending on the situation. If you're with close friends, probably you'll be more rambunctious and socially confident. And if you're put in a room full of professors here, probably you'd be a bit more inhibited. And at least most of you. So that's a simple example of the fact that often the situation is more important in determining behavior. He is also famous for developing a very simple but very nice measure of delay of gratification, or rather how good you are at delaying gratification, and it's the marshmallow test. So, very simple test. You get young kids in the lab, you have a plate in front of them, and on is a big marshmallow. You tell the kid, okay, I'm gonna leave for 10 minutes. If you eat the marshmallow, that's fine. You get a marshmallow. If you don't eat the marshmallow for those 10 minutes, I'll bring you another one, and then you get 2 marshmallows. And believe it or not, correlated with future outcomes. So it's predictive of later school grades, likelihood of dropping out of school, and measures like that. So it's a nice early test of delay of gratification, and for fun, I'll show you a clip of this. Now, if the audio still doesn't work for some reason, I mean, the visuals are pretty clear. You can see what's going on. Okay, so not as good without the audio, but here, yeah. So that's the marshmallow test. Okay, so next person, which I won't say too much about, it's another pretty simple idea, is George Kelly. So Kelly was writing at a time when behaviorism was still the dominant school. And remember that the behaviorists thought that, well, obviously you should only study behavior. That's one of the commitments of the paradigm. Only study behavior, don't theorize about mental processes. But Kelly said, if we want to predict people's behavior, if you want to predict what they'll do next, you do have to talk about what's going on in their head. It's not enough to look at reinforcement or things in the environment. And his fancy term, basically for beliefs people have in their head, is personal constructs. This to me seems like a bit of physics envy. Have I used the term physics envy in this class before? So many sciences, and especially social sciences, are jealous of physics because our theories are often pretty simple, and the physicists, have these really complicated theories. So we dress our theories up to seem more complicated than they are. This seems like a bit of a case of that. The idea is pretty simple. It's just that if you want to predict what people will do, you have to look at what they believe. And personal construct is basically a fancy term for a belief about the way the world is. So, simple case, you're walking up the bus, and you trip over someone's feet on the bus. If you want to know how they'll behave next, like will they yell at the person or not, you have to know whether they believe it was done on purpose or not. If I believe the guy tripped me on purpose, I'm going to behave one way. If I believe he didn't do it on purpose, I'm going to behave differently. Okay. Next term, locus of control. The locus of control is what you believe determines what happens to you, or what determines how your life goes. And there are two types. Internal and external. So if you have an internal locus of control, you believe that you determine what happens to you. The locus of control is inside yourself. You are the master of your own fate, if you like. If you have an external locus of control, you believe that something outside of you determines what happens to you. So this could be your upbringing, God, fate, anything like that. If you think it's out of your hands and those forces determine what happens to you, then you have, an external locus of control. Make sense? No questions? Yeah. Okay, next we're going to do a little activity to introduce the next concept. If you're in 1100, you'll have done this already, if you have it with me. How many of you are in my 1100 class? Oh, here, no, usually there's some overlap. Okay, this class there's no overlap. So on a piece of paper or on your notebook or computer, write down as many statements as you can in the next 2 minutes or so that begin with the words I am. These should be true statements, but don't make stuff up, about yourself that begin with the words I am. Show of hands, how many have at least 7? A little over half. Okay, we can stop there. So with the number you have, I want you to put them into 2 buckets. And I'm not an expert in administering this test, so this is a real test. In the real version, you do 20 of them, so it's called the 20 statements test if you want to look it up. Actually, I think it's in the key terms. Yeah, so it's in the key terms. So 20 statements test is when you write out 20 statements that begin with the words I am. And 2 buckets, relational statements and non-relational statements. What I mean by that is, if they're in the relational bucket, they are statements about your relationship to others. So I am a son, I am a sister, I'm an employee at McDonald's, I'm a member of X group. Those would all be relational ones. Any other statements that are just about you, then they're in the other bucket. So do a quick count of how many are in each. And then look at which one has more. So, show of hands, how many have more in the relational bucket? Only a handful. How many have more in the non-relational bucket? So good. Usually it's more. Anyone have exactly the same in each? Okay, so here's what you find. So this is a reliable cross-cultural difference. You find that people, this is of course on average, answer differently depending on whether they're in an individualistic culture or a collectivistic culture. So collectivistic cultures emphasize conformity to the expectations of your group, so doing what your family or community wants you to do. And on average, they are more likely to have a self-concept that is more relational. So they see themselves as embedded in social relationships. Whereas individualistic cultures emphasize individual uniqueness, so kind of standing out from the group, and are less concerned with conformity to the group norms. So on average, Western countries score higher on measures of individualism. Places like Latin America or Eastern Europe are maybe intermediate, and places like East Asia, South Asia, on average, are more collectivistic. This is not a value judgment, just an average difference. And on this test, you'll find that on average, people from collectivistic cultures give higher answers or give more relational statements in this test. Kind of an interesting finding. So that relates to a term that came up earlier, but comes up again in this part of the book, which is self-concept. And this is one way in which self-concepts can differ. Okay, just 3 terms left, and then we will call it a day. The first 2 are somewhat in tension. These are different processes. There's evidence for both of them in different contexts, but they, in some contexts, would work against each other. So the first is, I'll do it in this order, self-serving bias. And the other is self-verification. The first one will come up again, actually, in the social psych chapter. So self-serving bias is what it sounds like. It's a bias towards interpreting evidence in a way that makes you look good, or that makes you think you're good. So a common expression of this is when something bad happens or you don't do well at something, you blame the situation. When you do well, you give yourself the credit. Convenient. So, you do well in the psych test, you say, it's because I'm a genius. You do bad on the English test, that class is too hard. The teacher doesn't like me, or whatever. I didn't sleep well enough, that kind of thing. So that kind of thinking would fall under the self-serving bias. Actually, as an aside, this isn't testable, but there's also a cross-cultural difference there. You'll find that people in individualistic cultures have more of the self-serving bias. Self-verification is different. This is a bias towards doing things that confirm your self-concept, whether your self-concept is good or bad. So self-serving bias, the first one, that's just me good, uniformly. This one is, whatever my self-concept is, I'm going to try and verify it. So basically confirmation bias, but just for your self-concept. So as an example, let's say that someone believes they're funny. They will stick around with friends who laugh at their jokes. If they believe they're not funny, they will be around friends who don't laugh at their jokes. Because that confirms whatever belief they have. One study I read in the other textbook I used to use, there was a study that found that people with low self-esteem, so they have a self-concept that they're not so good, don't tend to stay with partners that treat them well. It's not consistent with their self-image. So that would be consistent with self-verification. Any questions on these 2? Okay, the last term, probably many of you have heard this, is narcissism. So this will come up again in the psychological disorders chapter, but this is having an inflated view of oneself. And I'll just mention my supervisor's done some studies on this from the University of Alberta, finding evidence that's consistent with this being, at least for some narcissists, a kind of defense mechanism, a kind of way of coping with actually low self-esteem. That they're actually deep down insecure, but they project this image of confidence. And one study he did that was really clever was, so on the basis of this theory, which was around beforehand, he predicted that they would not do well with meditation, with like sitting still with your thoughts. He predicted that would be very unpleasant. So a really nice study that he did during COVID. There's an app you can get, actually a few now, where you can put your thumb against the camera and get a measure of heart rate. He had people do that before and after meditating. So there'd be an instruction on how to meditate. You do the thumb reading before and after, and you can look at whether it made the heart rate go up or down. For most people, not surprising, heart rate goes down. People who score high in measures of narcissism, heart rate went up. So consistent with the idea that being alone with their own thoughts is unpleasant, and that the narcissistic tendencies may function to kind of project a certain image. That's the end of the chapter. Any last questions? Okay, see you all next week.